what is legit, what is not legit, what do you look for, etc. when it comes to good technique, bad technique, etc. So I'm gonna share my screen. For viewers, you're probably gonna see this is my channel right now. You're gonna see Mark and I on the side. We got a guy, he's demonstrating certain techniques. Again, they look pretty cool. Look almost like the Russian master, if you're familiar with that Victor dude who does this like
Oh
stuff.
yeah. I know the
Yeah.
guy.
So he kind of looks like that, but again, we don't know until he demonstrates on a. Unfortunately, this is not really pressure tested. This is kind of more compliant. So, and there's a reason I'm showing this. So I will talk to Mark about this once we finish watching this. But again, he's demonstrating certain kind of grab, certain na, as you call it in Chinese, certain grappling techniques, standing grappling techniques. Looks like now the guy's on the ground. He kicked him down there. So, yeah, it kind of looks like the Russian master a little bit. That was maybe a little bit of a joint lock that he's claiming. Again, now that's like it does look like the Russian master a lot.
With the dancing and the tap dancing at the end.
Yeah. Mark, the reason I wanted to show this one is because I think this highlights a lot of what we always talk about with certain martial arts that claim certain things, but then they can't really prove everything, is that it's so compliant. There's no pressure testing. I don't know if you can pull off any of that unless the guy's really trying to go at him, whether from a wrestling perspective or a fighting, like a striking perspective. The guy's literally just going, and then he does all these moves, right? So I wanted to start with this because on my channel, we've talked about this before, but this is another illustration of this.
The problem is that when you fight, people absorb punishment.
Yeah.
So whenever you're demonstrating any type of martial art technique, you've got to take into account that actually you're going to hit the guy. He's actually going to take that punch and hit you back anyway.
Yes.
People are quite resilient to pain.
Yeah.
So
especially under adrenaline.
Exactly. And you can imagine adrenaline, alcohol, drugs, all of these features are going to actually make the person much more resilient.
Yeah.
So, martial arts demos in general, you have to just take them sometimes with a pinch of salt.
Part of the problem with a lot of these compliance, and you can argue the same with like Taolu, katas, etc., is that you don't get this muscle memory of when you launch a strike, you got to prepare for him to respond. So whether you're doing a kata, a Taolu, or you're doing a compliance drill, there's this tendency, okay, I punched. All right, I punched him. I threw him. I do whatever. Now I just linger here, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, Mark, when we broke down the first video, usually you hit someone, even you grapple someone, there's a response. Even you take the back sometimes, they'll try to go like this to you.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If you don't practice under pressure, you're not going to get this habit of, okay, I punch. All right, I gotta move my head. I punch. Okay, I gotta prepare for whatever. Right? And that's where a lot of these compliant drills, these masters who don't test their stuff go wrong. They might even launch a first strike, but then it's like, oh, it didn't work. What do I do now?
The problem is that practitioners that teach martial arts that claim that they would be proficient in a street fight, I think that's wrong. I think if you're teaching and you're saying, look, this is a martial art, it's a stylized movement that we're practicing for XYZ reasons, then I think that's fine. But when you're saying, okay, this is what you're going to do when you've got someone who's high on cocaine and he's had a lot to drink and he's really angry, or he's with another group of lads and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, again, you have to deal with the emotions of the person and the psychology of the situation. It's not going to be down to what you look like. I mean, that's the worst thing about some women's self-defense techniques, where they teach women to pinch and do all these things. And that's ridiculous. You've got a man who's probably potentially 50 pounds heavier than you, and he's punching you. He's pulled you or thrown you to the ground. He's mounted you and he's punching you. And you're a woman reaching up and pinching his thigh or his chest or whatever you think is going to stop is not going to be effective. I think there's certain things are common sense. This is unlikely to work. I'm not going to say never, because there's always chance.
One thing I'll also add to what you said earlier about weight classes is that part of pressure testing, it makes you realize very quickly why combat sports fighting has weight classes, man. Because I'll tell 2 stories. One is someone that, let's say, has 30 pounds on you, when you pressure test and spar them, they think they're punching you light, but that doesn't feel light to you. When they have 30 pounds, force equals mass times acceleration, okay? 30 pounds more mass, that even going at the same acceleration that you're going, that's much harder. That's a perfect example. You realize, exactly like Mark said, maybe a pressure point could work 1 out of a million times, but if it's someone that's got 50 pounds on you, it's probably going to work 1 out of a billion times.
Is to rely on ideas and techniques that have a high percentage of usage, high percentage that they'll work against the majority of people in the majority of situations. There is no best, because whatever you do can be circumvented very, very easily by weapons, by numbers, by tactics.
This was a kid. The kid, he seemed to have jiu-jitsu experience. He took a guy down, got into side control, and then this was probably in high school. It looked like a high school fight. The kid was obviously not a popular kid, the kid that knew jiu-jitsu. So the guy who was on bottom, his friends came up behind and kicked the kid in the face and knocked the kid out. Ooh, that's a perfect example. Unfortunately, a lot of people who do what if he got a friend who can kick you in the face? That's their excuse not to train jiu-jitsu, which is also wrong.
But I always say that you have to train your weaknesses.
Yeah.
So if you're a stand-up fighter and you can't ground fight, you've got to learn how to ground fight.
Yeah.
If you're a ground fight and you can't stand up fight, you've got to learn how to stand up fight.
Yeah.
So my point, I guess I'm trying to say is that to be a well-rounded fighter, regardless of the discipline you train, you have to know and address your weaknesses. And if you don't know your weaknesses, you will never be completely able to defend yourself. And never is a very strong word, because there will always be that likelihood that someone will exploit your weakness. It's a fact.
Share my screen again, and then here we go. So this is another clip that was sent by a viewer. This is a guy who's teaching quote unquote bagua, so a Chinese kung fu system. So we can watch it once in full motion. We can watch another time in slow motion. But there's a lot of issues I see with this, and it's not just the compliance thing. So we'll watch it once, and then I'll kind of maybe show something else I'm a little concerned about besides the compliant part. So, but obviously it's very compliant. So it's a good follow-up from what we showed in the previous clip. So again, this guy's a quote unquote a Baogua master. He's demonstrating all these things. And again, some of it's dramatic, throwing his uke a little hard sometimes. Now, some of it could just be the over dramatic acting of the uke. But, you know, people criticize DKU sometimes with this too. But like, that seems like he's if you're demonstrating, you're throwing your compliant partner a little too hard, especially this one. Like, he literally kind of like slammed him on the ground a little bit. He hits his compliant demonstrative ukes hard. Like, what are you trying to show? What is the point of that?
The general public as well are to blame, because basically they want to believe in mystical arts.
Yeah.
And therefore they enable certain types of behavior. And that's unfortunately the case in a lot of these videos.
Yes. And Mark, I'm so glad you talked about this, because again, a lot of times we are very prone to blame the instructor or blame whatever institution, but the public has to take responsibility for some of this.
It's a two-way relationship. If we didn't seek these mystical arts, these people wouldn't have the students and the influence, and also likewise they wouldn't play up to it. But obviously we're talking very specifically about situations where people are teaching or providing information that is dubious at worst and dangerous. To sort of conclude the discussion, I think as people, as people that consume these information and watch films, we have to also consider, why are we training self-defense? Because self-defense means different things to different people. Because, for example, if you say to an elderly woman, self-defense to her would be, you know, very different to an 18-year-old lad who's going to be in an ego battle, or a middle-aged man, for example, who's a little bit portly and overweight, again, who's not going to be going to the local bar or what have you. Self-defense for him might be very different. So sometimes people are looking for a solution, which might be, how do I deal with someone that's climbing through my window at the dead of night to burgle me or invade my home? Or how do I deal with someone that wants to carjack me? You know, that to them is what self-defense is. But then they don't necessarily go to the right place to source that information. They go to a traditional martial arts school because they think that's what they don't understand their needs and the requirements. So self-defense is something that's different to different people. It's not the same. So just to clarify that, someone that is 16, 18, 19, 20 in their prime, for them, it more likely a fight or a self-defense context may be an ego battle. Now, for me, an ego battle is not self-defense because you can walk away from it. Self-defense is where you're put in a situation where you're forced to fight and protect yourself. That to me is self-defense. And then you've got all the variables to deal on top of that. So I think really there has to be a sort of a match between what is your needs and what what are your expectations. And people have a difference between their needs and their expectations when it comes to self-defense and martial arts.